Brand new NBC News count for you, and as many as 41 states say they cannot or will not comply with the White House request for voter data. State officials are either flat out refusing to hand the data over, saying it breaks their own state law, or they're limiting the information they share to only what is publicly available. All of this in response to a letter that was sent last Wednesday by the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. It requested voter information, including the names, addresses, birth dates, political parties, and partial Social Security numbers for all registered voters. Maine Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap is among those saying his state will not provide voter data. He's a Democrat who is on the commission himself. Also with us is Myrna Perez, who serves as the Deputy Director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Thanks to both of you. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to start with you because you've cited state law saying it bars you from giving this information to the commission. But if that law wasn't on the books, would you have problems providing this information to the commission?
Well, the information that would be available to the commission would be the same information that would be available to any outside entity, including a governmental entity that wanted to do research around elections. And that information would be pretty limited. It would be basically the name, the address, party affiliation, and year of birth. So it would not be very deep information. And under the Help America Vote Act, which was passed in 2002, the act provided for states to come up with their own statutes about what would be publicly available and who could access it. So we were looking at this as an outside request. Typical requests come from state parties, candidates, issue campaigns to get a copy of the voter file for get out the vote purposes. But beyond that, we limit who can have access and for what purpose. And under any circumstance, no matter who gets the voter file, it has to be maintained as confidential information. And this is where we ran up against a problem with the request, because in the letter it stated that any information that was provided to the commission was going to be made public by the commission under the Federal Open Records Law. That was a conflict with state statute, which said that the voter file had to be made confidential information. And because of that, we could not transmit the voter file to the commission.
So you have a question that a lot of people are raising about invasion of privacy. People say it's already taking up a lot of resources to get information that, as you have pointed out, is already publicly out there. And it could be costly for some of these states to try to put this information together, transmit this information. So why do it? What do you think is behind this?
Well, I think the concern has come from some members of the commission about people who are registered to vote in more than one state, which, by the way, is not against the law. You can't vote in more than one state in a given election. But there's been this recurring suspicion that people move from state to state, voting in multiple jurisdictions. And when we reflect on the Help America Vote Act, it may have been a gap that they didn't have any provision for a cross-state voter registration check to make sure that administrators do clean up their voter registration rolls. But there also has never really been demonstrated a problem. And I think the advantage, to speak on the devil's advocate side of doing this, is that you dispel the rumor that people are moving from state to state to vote. My experience is that if you can get somebody to vote once, you're doing a great given officials.
Given our numbers, I think
problem.
That's true. I mean, it's compared to a lot of, for example, European countries, our voter turnout is pretty sad. And I have to tell you both that when all of this started to come up, I have a lot of friends who have moved, and I'm one of them who's moved from California to Washington, D.C., to New York State over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. And none of us knew that we had to, unregister in one place before we registered. It certainly never occurred to any of us that we were going to vote in 2 states. Myrna, what do you think the point is behind all of this?
The concern is that they're going to take this data, use some dubious methodology and a bunch of junk science to come up with policies that are going to justify federal laws and actions that make it to register to vote. The commission was ill-conceived and ill-designed. This rollout of this request was ill-conceived and ill-designed. This is done on the heels of the president making some outlandish claims that 3 to 6 million people voted illegally in the election.
For which there is absolutely no substantiation.
There's no substantiation for this. And I think the problem that we're having right now is that this ill-conceived, ill-designed commission is taking an issue that should be nonpartisan. People should be able to study elections, figuring out how to improve it, figure out ways to tinker the system so that it better serves voters and that we have elections that are full of integrity and are secure, and turning it into this political issue that is making everyone very skeptical that it's going to produce anything worthwhile and is actually going to hurt voters.
Well, there's a different view of how this is political. Chris Sununu, who's the governor of New Hampshire, was asked about the states that are saying no to this. Here's what he said.
For those governors who are saying no, I mean, they're just playing politics.
So he is essentially saying the people who are playing politics here are Democrats and others who basically don't want to be able to prove what the president is saying.
I respectfully disagree. As Secretary Dunlap said, states have created their own balancing act between making the voter rolls available for public inspection so that political parties, researchers, and the like can examine them, and protecting people's privacy. And if the information is set over to this federal agency and a national database is created of supposedly everyone registered, states are unable to enforce their laws. One of the things that I found so shocking is that Secretary Kobach is a secretary, and he has dumped in the laps of secretaries all across the country both a legal problem, because it's going to be difficult for them to enforce their own state laws if they comply in many instances, and a political problem because voters do not like the idea of some politician is requesting information like their Social Security number or how recently they voted.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Secretary? Does this create problems for people who are in your position across the country that really isn't necessary to have?
Well, speaking only for myself, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is follow the law, and that's what we did in this case. You know, as you mentioned, I am on the commission. We talked about this data request, and when we talked about it, I emphasized that it should be a request and not a demand, and it should also only include that information which is publicly available under individual state laws, and that was the nature of the request. It's generated an awful lot of interest. I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of emails. We've had to keep a phone log of people calling in about this because of the nature of the information relating to elections, and it makes people very, very sensitive to think that other people are looking to see, whether or not they're active in the electoral process. You contrast that with the other thing that we dealt with earlier this year, which was compliance with the Real ID Act, which is actually far more invasive and includes much more proprietary information, including images of your original certified birth certificate, to be accessible by law enforcement, including federal law enforcement. And yet people didn't feel so badly about that because it was going to help them travel. So, there is a lot of information about us out there, but I think the point is here that people are very sensitive about their participation in a democratic election process, and the secrecy of the ballot is paramount. And for those of us who are elections officials, as it was stated here just a few moments ago, I want anything that we do to make it easier for people to participate in the process and feel confident about their participation in the process. So there is a very sensitive balancing act here. And I think every Secretary of State or Chief Elections Officer, if it's not the Secretary of State, has to examine this very carefully and proceed along their own individual state laws in order to determine what they're going to do with this request.
Let's hope that we can all agree, whatever your... We want more people to vote who legitimately can vote. I want to thank both of you.